On July 17, 1918, in the basement of an ordinary merchant's house in Yekaterinburg, one of history's greatest fortunes came to an end. In less than 15 minutes, the execution of the last Tsar marked the collapse of an empire and the disappearance of one of the largest concentrations of wealth the world had ever seen. To understand the scale of what vanished, you have to look at the imperial ledgers. The Romanov dynasty ruled Russia for more than 3 centuries, and by the early 20th century, their empire stretched across nearly 1/6 of the Earth's land surface. Their immense holdings in land, precious metals, royal estates, and state-controlled enterprises have led some historians to estimate the family's wealth in today's money at around $300 billion. For a modern financial advisor, this portfolio would appear almost impossible to destroy. It was diversified across virtually every major asset class imaginable: land, gold, platinum, diamonds, agriculture, railways, forests, art collections, and palaces. It was built to survive wars, recessions, crop failures, and market crashes. But it didn't survive. Within just a few days, this seemingly indestructible wealth machine completely collapsed. Today, we're conducting a forensic audit of the Romanov Empire to uncover exactly how a fortune that looked crash-proof on paper disappeared almost overnight. Hidden inside that collapse is a vulnerability that still threatens fortunes today, a weakness that doesn't appear on any balance sheet. The foundation of the Romanov wealth engine was land. Over generations, successive Tsars expanded the Russian Empire until it covered roughly 8.8 million square miles. Those vast territories contained fertile farmland, endless forests, rivers, mines, and strategic trade routes that generated enormous wealth year after year. Russia also possessed some of the world's richest deposits of gold and platinum. During much of the 19th century, it ranked among the leading gold producers on Earth. The imperial treasury accumulated massive reserves of precious metals alongside priceless collections of diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, and other jewels. The Romanovs also invested heavily in culture and infrastructure. They controlled more than 150 palaces across the empire. Their extraordinary art collections would later become the foundation of the famous Hermitage Museum. Massive infrastructure projects like the Trans-Siberian Railway strengthened trade while increasing the empire's economic power. On paper, this was exactly what financial experts today would call a perfectly diversified portfolio. If agriculture suffered, mining continued producing wealth. If commodity prices weakened, real estate still held value. If one industry declined, another continued generating income. The Romanov fortune appeared insulated against ordinary economic disasters. But buried inside that portfolio was one enormous hidden risk. Every single asset depended on one thing: political authority. The Tsar's ownership of this vast empire wasn't protected by market forces or private contracts. It existed because millions of people, including government officials, nobles, and the military, accepted his right to rule. That political legitimacy was the true asset backing every palace, railway, mine, and fortune. As long as society believed in the monarchy, the system worked. But by the late 19th century, that foundation had begun to crack. Russia industrialized rapidly, pulling millions of workers in overcrowded factories where wages remained low and working conditions were harsh. At the same time, the imperial family continued living in extraordinary luxury inside dozens of magnificent palaces. Many of Nicholas II's own advisors urged him to modernize the monarchy and share political power through constitutional reforms. Nicholas refused. He genuinely believed that his authority came directly from God and that surrendering power would violate his sacred duty as Tsar. That decision proved disastrous. In 1905, peaceful demonstrators marched toward the Winter Palace, hoping to present their grievances to the emperor. Instead, imperial troops opened fire. Hundreds of civilians were killed or wounded during what became known as Bloody Sunday. That single event shattered public confidence in the monarchy. People no longer viewed the Tsar as their protector. They increasingly saw him as an obstacle to reform. And that's when the Romanov fortune became dangerously fragile. Because wealth without public legitimacy is often far less secure than it appears. Nicholas still possessed gold. He still owned palaces. He still commanded enormous resources. But the public consensus that gave those assets value was beginning to disappear.
The final shock arrived with World War I. Russia entered the conflict expecting victory. Instead, it faced catastrophe. Millions of soldiers were killed or wounded. Military defeats mounted. Food shortages spread across the cities, while inflation destroyed the purchasing power of ordinary families. By early 1917, the Russian economy was collapsing. Workers in Petrograd launched massive strikes, demanding bread and political change. The government ordered soldiers to restore order. But something extraordinary happened. Many soldiers refused. Instead of firing on the protesters, entire military units joined them. At that moment, the enforcement mechanism protecting the Romanov Empire disappeared. Without the army's loyalty, the Tsar's legal ownership of his empire became meaningless. Within only a few days, Nicholas II abdicated the throne, ending more than 300 years of Romanov rule.
The greatest weakness in the empire had never been financial. It had been political. Some historians believe Nicholas had previously transferred significant amounts of gold and currency into foreign banks, although the exact amounts remain disputed. If true, those transfers represented the only meaningful attempt to preserve wealth beyond the political system that created it. For everyone else, however, the collapse was total. The Romanovs lost their throne, their fortune, their empire, and ultimately, their lives. The lesson remains surprisingly modern. Diversification alone cannot protect wealth if every asset depends on the survival of a single political system. Markets change, governments change, societies change. And when leaders refuse to adapt to changing realities, even the greatest fortunes in history can disappear almost overnight. The Romanov Empire wasn't destroyed because it lacked wealth. It collapsed because it failed to recognize that legitimacy, not gold, is often the most valuable asset of all. The last photograph of Tsar Nicholas II was taken in the garden of the IPF house, the building where he and his family would be executed weeks later. He is standing in the sun, looking calm. He is wearing simple clothes. He looks like a grandfather. He was 50 years old. He had inherited the largest personal fortune in human history. He had lost every penny of it, and his family's lives, because he refused to believe the world had changed. The Romanov story is not a tragedy about violence. It is a tragedy about rigidity. 300 years of brilliant wealth accumulation, land, gold, art, infrastructure, diversification, destroyed in 4 days by one man's refusal to adapt. The greatest wealth systems in history were not destroyed by enemies. They were destroyed from within, by the failure to evolve when evolution was the only option. That is the lesson of the Romanovs, and it is the most important wealth lesson history has ever taught. I'm the Money Chronicle, decoding the wealth secrets history forgot to teach you. Subscribe now, and I'll see you in the next video.